36 years of running a school building will teach you something that no management book ever puts cleanly into words. The most dangerous person in any difficult conversation is the one who already knows how it ends. Lisa thought she knew how it ended. She was wrong about that, but she sat down with such confidence that I almost admired it. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Josh Cook. I am 68 years old. For nearly 4 decades, I was a fixture in the Greenville County School District, right here in Greenville, South Carolina. I spent 36 years in that same brick building. I walked the halls as a young classroom teacher, then as an assistant principal, and finally, I occupied the corner office with the large window that looked out over the meticulously striped football field. I retired in 2021 at the age of 65. I walked away with a state pension, a firm handshake from the superintendent, and the quiet, solid conviction that I had earned the right to enjoy whatever came next. What came next, however, was Pat's death. My wife, Patricia, Pat to everyone who loved her, passed away in October 2022 after a long, grueling illness. She handled her decline with the specific, unyielding grace of a woman who had spent 29 years as a public librarian. Pat firmly believed that every difficult thing in this world, including death, was infinitely more manageable if you simply stayed organized and kept your voice down. We had been married since 1981. 41 years of shared coffee, quiet reading, and steady companionship. She was only 64 years old. The Greenville County Library on Heritage Green Place flew their flag at half-staff the day of her funeral. I did not know they were going to do that. Even now, I have never quite been able to think about that flag drooping in the autumn wind without needing a moment to myself. The reception after the service was a blur of dark suits, casseroles, and well-meaning condolences from people who didn't know what to say. I was standing by the window of the church hall, holding a styrofoam cup of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. That was when my son Nathan walked over. He is 41, the branch manager at a commercial insurance firm on Verde Boulevard. He has my height, but his mother's tendency to try and fix things that are hurting.
Dad, you need to sit down. You've been standing there greeting people for 2 straight hours.
I'm fine, Nathan. The coffee is terrible, but the standing is fine. It gives me something to do with my hands.
People are starting to leave. Lisa is packing up the remaining food into Tupperware. Dad, we need to talk about what happens tomorrow and the day after that.
I will wake up. I will read the morning paper. I will likely go out into the yard and finally trim the oak tree that your mother had been asking me to trim since June. That is what happens tomorrow.
You know that's not what I mean. I've been watching you all week. You're holding it together because that's what you do. But you shouldn't be in that big house alone. Not now. Not with everything reminding you of her.
It is the house your mother and I shared for 33 years on Overbrook Drive. Of course it reminds me of her. I want it to remind me of her.
It's too much empty space, Dad. Listen to me. Lisa and I talked about this last night. We want you to come stay with us. We have the spare room on Devanure Road. It's set up, it's comfortable, and you won't be by yourself.
People say things at funerals, Nathan. They say things when their hearts are heavy, and they mean it in the moment, but they don't fully understand the weight of what they're offering. I appreciate it, truly, but I am not a burden to be managed.
Nobody thinks you're a burden. You're my father. The kids miss you. Cooper has been asking when Grandpa Josh is coming over to look at his Legos. Ava wants to show you her drawings. And honestly, I need you around right now, too.
I looked at him. He put his hand on my shoulder, a heavy, sincere weight. He was a branch manager who understood risk and liability, but right then, he was just a grieving son trying to keep his father from fading into the wallpaper of an empty house.
Just sell the Overbrook place, Dad. Take the equity, take your savings, and just breathe for a while. No mortgage, no yard work, no empty rooms. Come live with us. We have the room. Please.
I believed him. In my 36 years of analyzing human behavior, I should have known better than to make a life-altering decision on the day of my wife's funeral. But I looked at my son, and I believed his intentions.
We'll make it work, Dad. It'll be good for all of us. You'll see.
I nodded, setting my cold coffee on the windowsill. The next month was a study in clinical detachment. I sold the house on Overbrook Drive. I packed carefully, stripping 33 years of a shared life down to the absolute essentials. I took her reading glasses from the nightstand. I took a photograph from 1987 where she is laughing at something off camera and looks exactly like herself. And I took $187,000 in savings money that two people had spent a lifetime being incredibly careful about. I moved into Nathan and Lisa's spare room on Devonshire Road in January 2023, stepping blindly into an arrangement that was destined to teach me a final, brutal lesson in administration. The first 10 months were fine. Not warm, not wonderful, but fine. It was the particular fine of a household that has added a person it didn't fully plan for, a delicate ecosystem constantly adjusting to an unexpected weight. We had dinner together most nights. The conversation stayed safely in shallow channels, the weather, the traffic on Verde Boulevard, the kids' school projects. It was a rhythm that functioned perfectly well without anyone fully committing to it. You learn a lot about a household when you become a quiet observer in it. Lisa is 37 years old and runs her home with the organizational precision of someone who has decided that competence is a personality trait. The pantry shelves were labeled. The family calendar on the refrigerator was color-coded. She is not an unkind woman. I want to be fair about that. But she is managed. Everything in her life is heavily managed, carefully curated, and strategically positioned, including me. And for a long time, I was perfectly willing to be managed within reason. Nathan had asked me to be there. He had stood in that church hall with tears in his eyes and asked for my presence, and I trusted that. I tried to make myself useful. I fixed things. That is what I do. When I am somewhere and something is broken, I fix it. There was the kitchen faucet which had been dripping for months, tapping out a steady, irritating rhythm that I silenced with a 30-cent washer and 10 minutes of work. There were the gutters, choked with wet oak leaves, which I cleared on a Saturday morning in September without being asked while Nathan was on a conference call. There was the loose banister on the back stairs that Nathan had been meaning to get to for 2 entire years. I bought the right screws, glued the joints, and made it solid again. I bought my own groceries. I paid for my own gas. I stayed out of rooms where I wasn't needed. I would read in the armchair by the window, or I would go for long walks. I want to be exceedingly clear about this because it matters for what happened next. I was not a burden. I was, by any reasonable objective measure, an asset. A 68-year-old retired principal with a state pension, a separate savings account, and 36 years of professional experience in not making problems for people is not a burden. He is, in fact, a resource. Lisa had understood this perfectly. I just didn't know yet how she planned to use that resource. That brings us to February 6th, 2024, a Tuesday. I know the exact date because I noted it in the small leather-bound journal I keep on the nightstand. It was a habit Pat started decades ago, and one I inherited when she passed, writing down the day's one thing worth remembering. That particular Tuesday's entry has exactly 2 words. I will tell you what they are later. I had spent the entire afternoon repainting the wooden trim on the back fence. The winter sun had been deceptively bright, though the air was sharp. Nathan had mentioned earlier that week that he had priced the job at $400 from a professional painter over on Angler Drive. I had quietly gone out, bought the correct exterior primer and paint for $23 from the hardware store on Augusta Road, and finished the entire job in 3 hours. I came inside around 4 o'clock. The house was quiet. I washed the white paint off my knuckles at the kitchen sink, watching the water turn cloudy and spiral down the drain. I poured myself a tall glass of ice water, pulled out a chair, and sat down at the kitchen table to rest my back. Then Lisa walked in. She didn't just wander into the room. She entered with purpose. She pulled out the chair directly across from me with the specific, vibrating energy of someone who has been building toward this moment for much longer than the moment itself warrants. She sat down. She folded her hands deliberately on the polished oak table, right over her color-coded planner, and looked at me. I recognized the expression immediately. I had seen it 1,000 times during 36 years of parent-teacher conferences. It is the expression of someone who has spent hours in front of a bathroom mirror, rehearsing exactly what they are about to say, and is now finally executing the plan.
Josh.
Not Dad, not good afternoon, not even a basic greeting. Just Josh. I felt the atmosphere in the room shift, dropping 10 degrees. I kept my face perfectly neutral.
I need to talk to you about the financial arrangement here.
I took a slow sip of my water. I felt the condensation on the outside of the glass beneath my fingertips. I set the glass down precisely on a coaster. What arrangement, Lisa?
You've been living here for 12 months now.
She paused. It wasn't a natural pause. It was a deliberate, prepared silence designed to let the weight of her words settle on my shoulders. I didn't take the bait. I simply waited.
12 months with no rent, no utilities, and no financial contribution to the household. We need to address this.
I kept my voice pleasant, entirely devoid of the defensive edge she was clearly waiting for. I fix everything that breaks in this house, Lisa, and I buy all of my own groceries. I handle my own expenses. And just as a matter of record, I painted your back fence this afternoon for $23 instead of the $400 Nathan was going to pay a contractor. She did not look toward the window. She did not acknowledge the fence. Her folded hands remained perfectly still.
You're sitting on $187,000.
She knew the number. She didn't estimate, she didn't guess. She said it the way you say a number you've been thinking about calculating and dreaming about for a very long while. She spoke it with the particular fluency of deep familiarity. Nathan had told her, my own son had sat in bed and told his wife the exact, down-to-the-penny amount of money his grieving father had in his life savings. I sat with that realization for a heavy second. I filed it away in the back of my mind. I kept my face arranged in the calm, unreadable mask I had perfected over decades of school administration. That money is Pat's and my retirement. 30 years of being incredibly careful with a high school principal's salary and a public librarian's salary. That is what that number represents. It is a lifetime of discipline.
And this house, Josh, this house is what Nathan and I pay for every single month. We have a mortgage. We have 2 kids. We have expenses that are growing. You are living in an asset that we finance.
She unclasped her hands, spreading them flat across the table in the dramatic manner of someone presenting a corporate proposal they consider logically unanswerable.
So here is what we'd like to propose.
Another calculated pause.
A one-time contribution of $120,000 toward the household. Think of it as a mortgage investment. You invest in the house, you secure your place here permanently, and we alleviate our monthly burden. It makes sense for everyone.
I looked at her. I looked deeply into her eyes, searching for any trace of hesitation, any flicker of shame. There was none. She was entirely convinced of her own righteousness. Or,
Excuse me.
I asked for the or. 36 years of watching people deliver ultimatums taught me that the or is always the part they practice the most. Let's hear it.
Or you find somewhere else to live.
The words hung in the air, sharp and toxic. Outside the kitchen window, a car moved slowly down Devonshire Road, somewhere next door. One of Cooper's friends was rhythmically bouncing a basketball in a driveway. The normalcy of the outside world stood in stark contrast to the quiet violence that had just occurred at the kitchen table. Over my career, I have managed parents who screamed until they were hoarse. I have managed parents who cried hysterically, and parents who threatened me with frivolous legal action over a failed geometry grade. I have handled furious school board members, stubborn union representatives, corrupt building inspectors, and one genuinely memorable facilities dispute involving a catastrophically leaking gymnasium roof and a very firm, absurd position from the district office. I know what a power play looks like. I know exactly what it sounds like. And most importantly, I know exactly what the person running the power play expects the other person to do. They expect you to panic. They expect you to plead. They expect you to negotiate from a position of absolute fear and dependency. I did none of those things. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue about my rights. I simply picked up my glass. I finished the rest of my water in one smooth draft. I stood up, walked to the sink, rinsed the glass meticulously, and placed it upside down in the drying rack. Then I turned and looked at Lisa evenly. Thank you for letting me know. I didn't wait for her response. I turned my back on her and walked calmly out of the kitchen, heading straight for my bedroom.
Josh, we should finish this conversation.
I didn't stop walking. The conversation was already finished. She just didn't have the experience to know it yet. I went into my room and closed the door with a quiet, decisive click. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up Pat's photograph from the nightstand, holding it in my hands for a long while. "Well, Pat," I whispered to the empty room, "looks like I'm going house hunting." I could almost hear her asking me about the square footage and whether the neighborhood had good sidewalks. I did not make any actual decisions that night. I am 68 years old, and I did not successfully survive 36 years of running a school building by making strategic decisions at 9 o'clock in the evening when my blood was still running warm from an insult. I turned off the lamp, lay back against the pillows, and I slept on it. The next morning, I woke up at exactly 5:30. I did not feel angry. I felt remarkably intensely clear. I went to the kitchen, made a pot of black coffee, and sat by the window watching the sun come up over Devonshire Road. At 7 o'clock, I picked up my phone and called Ray Doward. Ray is 70 years old and spent 22 years as my assistant principal at Woodmont High School before he finally retired and moved to Taylor's about 8 miles north of Greenville. He owns a reliable pickup truck, possesses an inexhaustible supply of terrible jokes that I have been pretending to find tiresome for decades, and carries the deep, unspoken loyalty of a man who has been through something immensely difficult alongside you and decided that makes you permanent. He picked up on the second ring. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I told him I needed Beverly Cross's phone number unless he knew another Beverly Cross who sold real estate. He asked me what had happened. I told him concisely, without embellishment, because concisely is how I tell things. I explained that Lisa had given me an ultimatum with the cold, calculating energy of a corporate spreadsheet. I also told him that Nathan had not been in the room, but my son had clearly provided her with the exact number in my savings account, which meant he knew exactly what she was going to do with it. Ray was quiet for a long moment in that specific way old friends are quiet when they are deciding whether to say the thing they are actually thinking. He simply asked if I was doing okay. I told him I was looking for a house. That was all the answer he needed. By Thursday morning, Beverly Cross had 4 listings in my exact price range. I told her I would be making a cash purchase with 0 contingencies. That is the distinct, undeniable advantage of being a 68-year-old retired principal with $187,000 sitting in a completely separate account that nobody else has any legal or moral claim on. I walked through 3 of those houses that weekend. The first 2 were fine. They were fine in the way that things are fine when you are looking for something you haven't quite named yet. They had 4 walls, a roof, and functional plumbing, but they were entirely empty of spirit. The third one stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a 2-bedroom Craftsman on Crescent Avenue, tucked away in the historic North Main neighborhood of Greenville. It was exactly 8 minutes away from Devonure Road. The front porch desperately needed repainting. The kitchen faucet was visibly loose. Apparently, I am an absolute magnet for dripping hardware. The backyard featured a massive, mature dogwood tree that was just beginning to come into bud. But the repairs and the landscaping are not why I stopped. Pat and I used to walk down Crescent Avenue on Sunday evenings. Years ago, before she got ill, before the hospital visits and the terrible fading last years, we would drive to North Main just to walk. We walked the neighborhood in the particular leisurely way of 2 people who are not walking anywhere specific, but are walking together with absolute purpose. She had pointed at houses on that very street more than once. She never did it wistfully, and she never did it with any bitter longing. She just looked at them with the pure appreciation of a woman who deeply loved a well-kept craftsman home and wasn't shy about saying so. I stood on the wooden porch of that house. I looked at the dogwood tree in the yard. I stood there and I just sat with the feeling for a long moment. I could feel her there. Then I pulled out my phone and I called Beverly. I told her to make the offer. Cash. Whatever they were asking, just give it to them. Beverly called me back in exactly 2 hours. She said, "Josh, it's yours." I want you to hold on to that word for a second. Yours. At 68 years old, after a long, disorienting year of sleeping in spare rooms, eating heavily managed dinners, contributing to someone else's mortgage, and sitting through a Tuesday afternoon ultimatum about the money I had spent an entire lifetime earning. Having something that was genuinely, legally, and completely mine felt like the very first full breath of oxygen I had taken in 12 months. I drove back to Devonure Road that evening. Nathan was standing in the kitchen, leaning against the marble counter with a glass of water when I walked in. I didn't hesitate. I found a place. I'll be out by the 1st of March. I watched his face. The look that washed over him was the distinct, painful look of a man who had known deep down that this exact moment was coming, but had desperately talked himself into believing it wasn't.
Dad, you didn't. You didn't have to do that.
I found a good place. It's only 8 minutes from here. You can bring the kids over on Saturdays.
Listen to me, please. It was just a proposal. Lisa didn't mean it as an ultimatum. She was just laying out options for the future. You're taking it the wrong way.
I looked at my son. I looked at this grown man. This was the same boy I had coached through middle school homework, through high school heartbreak, and through a broken collarbone from a bicycle accident in 1996 that he still secretly blames me for not preventing. I loved him, but I was not going to let him lie to my face. Nathan. She told me to hand over $120,000 or find somewhere else to live. We both know exactly what that is. You are a businessman. Do not insult my intelligence by calling it a proposal.
We were just stressed about money, Dad. The mortgage rate adjusted. The kids are getting more expensive. She just thought. We thought. You had that money just sitting there.
I am not angry. And I meant it when I said it. I'm not furious, Nathan. I'm just going home. He looked down at the kitchen counter, unable to hold my gaze. He knew he had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Moving day was March 2nd. It was a crisp Saturday morning. Ray came rumbling down the street with his truck at 8 o'clock sharp. He had an unspeakable, highly inappropriate joke about retirement communities locked and loaded before he had even put the vehicle in park. We started immediately. We loaded all of my boxes into the bed of the truck in an hour and 40 minutes. I did not have very much. That is one of the strange, clarifying gifts of moving into a spare room in someone else's house. You bring only what truly matters. And after surviving there for a year, you know exactly what that is. I packed Pat's photograph. I packed her reading glasses. I packed the small journal I kept on the nightstand. I brought my books, my tools, my clothes, and a stubborn old coffee maker that has somehow outlasted 3 separate kitchen remodels and shows absolutely no intention of stopping anytime soon. Nathan carried 2 boxes out to the truck. He set them down carefully, and then he just stood in the driveway. He stood there with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, while Ray and I did the rest of the heavy lifting. Lisa did not come out of the house. I noted her absence, but I noted it without judgment. Some people simply cannot face the physical reality of their own decisions while that reality is still in motion. That is a human limitation. It is not necessarily a character verdict, just a failure of courage. Right before I closed the tailgate and got into the passenger seat of Ray's truck, Nathan walked over to the window. He looked exhausted.
You really didn't have to do this, Dad. We could have figured it out. We could have sat down and talked about it again.
I reached over and pulled the seatbelt across my chest, clicking it firmly into place. I looked at him one last time. Neither did she, Nathan. I rolled the window up. Ray put the truck in gear and pulled slowly out of the driveway, the tires crunching against the pavement. I stared straight out the windshield. I didn't look back at the house. I want to be extremely precise about what I felt sitting in that truck cab, because I do not want anyone to think this is a simple story about triumphant revenge. I was 68 years old. I was driving away from the house where my own grandchildren lived. I was leaving the place where they had started calling me Grandpa Josh. I was leaving the living room where Cooper had proudly shown me his intricate Lego collections every single Saturday morning. I was leaving the hallway where little Ava had taken to leaving her crayon drawings right outside my bedroom door. I was leaving all of that behind, and I assure you it cost me something incredibly real. It tore a hole in my chest that I knew would take a long time to heal. But a man who has spent 36 years standing in front of young people, teaching them day after day that their self-respect is absolutely not negotiable, cannot suddenly go home and negotiate his own away for the sake of comfort. I had to leave. The Crescent Avenue house was waiting for me. It was everything the real estate listing had promised, and a few things it hadn't, including a badly loose board on the back steps that I happily fixed by Sunday afternoon, simply because apparently this is just who I am now. On the second morning in the Crescent Avenue house, I woke up without the immediate suffocating weight of someone else's schedule pressing down on me. I lay in bed for a long time, just listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my own home. Old houses breathe differently than new ones. They settle, they creak, they hold the temperature of the morning air in their wooden bones. I made my coffee, poured it into my favorite chipped mug, and walked out to the front porch. That was when I found a note in my brass mailbox. It was folded exactly once, written in the deliberate, elegant cursive of someone who had learned to write long before keyboards made handwriting an optional skill. The note read, "Welcome to Crescent Avenue. I have very strong opinions about azalea placement, and I make exceptional pound cake. If either of those things appeals to you, I am right next door. Sincerely, June Whitfield." I stood by the mailbox, tracing the ink with my eyes, and I read it twice. Then I smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that arrives softly on your face before you even plan it. June Whitfield, as I soon discovered, was 71 years old. She was a retired Greenville County librarian who had worked at the main branch on Heritage Green Place for 27 years. She had known my Pat. Not closely, perhaps. They had served on a district collection committee together sometime around 2014. But she knew her well enough. When I finally walked over to introduce myself 2 days later across the low, wrought iron fence that separated our front yards, I mentioned Pat's name. June stopped watering her ferns. She looked at me with the particular focused recognition of someone placing a face they had been told stories about. She told me that she recognized me as Patricia Cook's husband. She said Pat had talked about me. According to June, Pat had proudly told the other librarians that her husband fixed everything in the house himself, but always pretended it wasn't impressive. June paused, looked at my newly repaired porch steps, and noted that Pat had been right. It was impressive. I liked June Whitfield immediately. Pat always had impeccable judgment about people, and Pat had apparently vouched for me years ago. That was sufficient for both of us. June's handwritten note went straight onto my refrigerator that afternoon, held up by a simple magnet. It is still there today. For the first 3 weeks on Crescent Avenue, I kept entirely to myself. It is what I do when I am somewhere new. I focus on getting the rooms right, learning the distinct sounds the house makes at night, and methodically identifying what needs physical attention and in what priority. My old friend Ray came over for dinner on a Thursday night. He looked around the living room, ate a large plate of my homemade stew, and formally declared the house significantly better than his brother Marcus's cramped guest room. Coming from Ray, I accepted this as the highest possible praise. During the second week, true to her written word, June brought over a pound cake. She simply set it on the porch railing without knocking, a move of considerable quiet social confidence that I recognized and deeply respected, and left a second note underneath the tin. The note stated that oven temperature matters more than people admit, and that this particular cake was correct. She was right. It was absolutely correct. I settled into Crescent Avenue with the particular profound ease of a man who has finally stopped holding his breath. I was healing. I was rebuilding my routines. And then, exactly 3 weeks after moving day, on a quiet Saturday morning in late March, my phone rang. I looked at the caller. ID. It was Nathan. I picked it up expecting a brief question about the kids or a mundane update about the weather, but when he spoke, his voice had absolutely none of the careful, curated management of the Devon-Ure Road months. It was stripped down to something much younger, much more fragile and entirely uncomposed.
Dad, are you there?
Go ahead, Nathan. I'm listening.
Dad, I need to talk to you. I really need to talk to you right now.
Take a breath, Nathan. What's going on?
We lost the Harrington account.
He paused, and in that agonizing silence I could hear him struggling to keep his breathing steady. I knew exactly what the Harrington account was. It was his firm's anchor.
It was our biggest commercial client, Dad. $280,000 in annual premium. The renewal meeting was on Thursday, and it was a disaster. I wasn't focused. I missed key details in their risk assessment profile that a first-year associate should have caught. I completely mishandled the renewal, and they walked. They moved their entire portfolio to a competitor in Charlotte.
I see.
No, it gets worse. My regional director is involved now. He flew down yesterday. My performance bonus is completely gone for the year, and the overall branch numbers are tanking because I spent so much time trying to save this one account that I neglected the rest of the pipeline. I don't know if I'm going to keep my position, Dad.
He stopped talking. I sat in one of the wooden chairs at my new kitchen table on Crescent Avenue and looked out the window at the morning light hitting the backyard dogwood tree. I was not entirely surprised. I had known this kind of collapse was possible. Not this specific account and not necessarily this specific week, but I had recognized the overarching shape of it for months. I remembered the red ink credit card statements I had accidentally glimpsed being quickly shuffled off the kitchen counter during my year on Devonure Road. I remembered the hushed, tense conversations between Nathan and Lisa that immediately stopped the second I walked into a room. Nathan had been desperately managing a financial crisis he didn't want me to see. This was what he had been managing.
Dad, are you still there? We are in a really difficult position right now.
What do you need, Nathan?
We need help. We need a lifeline.
The desperation in his voice was thick, heavy with the weight of a man watching the walls of his carefully constructed life cave in.
Dad, I know what Lisa said to you in February was wrong. I know that now. I knew it then. And I know you didn't have to pack up and leave. I know exactly what I should have done when she ambushed you with that conversation at the kitchen table, and I didn't do it. I was a coward. I was so stressed about the money, so panicked about everything falling apart that I just let her do it. I let her treat you like a bank, and I'm so sorry.
I listened to him break down over the phone. My son, the man I had raised to be strong and honorable, was weeping quietly into the receiver.
I'm asking for your help, Dad. Please. I don't know what else to do.
I hear you, Nathan.
We could really use if you could just...
Nathan, stop! I cut him off. My voice instinctively shifted into the exact calibrated tone I had used for 36 years whenever a genuinely important truth needed to be delivered to a student, a parent, or a teacher, without any room for confusion. It was calm, it was low, and it was entirely immovable. I'm going to say something right now. Nathan and I need you to listen to me very clearly.
Okay, I'm listening.
I love you. I love you, and I love Cooper, and I love Ava. That is a fundamental fact of my life. That has not changed, and that will never change, no matter what happens with your job or your accounts. But what has changed is this. I live on Crescent Avenue now. I live in a house that is legally and entirely mine, and my retirement savings are mine. That is the permanent arrangement going forward. There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. I let the silence stretch. I needed him to absorb the boundary I had just drawn in the sand.
I understand.
What I will do, I continued, is come over to your house tomorrow, Sunday at noon. I am not coming over to write you a check, Nathan. I am coming over to sit at the table with you and Lisa. I will help you build a comprehensive list of the right calls to make. I will help you figure out the correct sequence of steps for two people who are in a very tight financial spot and desperately need someone completely objective to help them think clearly. That is what I can do for you.
Just advice.
Yes, my time and my experience. That costs me absolutely nothing but time, and it is the most valuable thing I can offer you right now. Another silence followed. Then his voice came back very quietly.
Why would you even do that for us, after what Lisa said to you? After I just stood there and let her kick you out.
Because you are my son, Nathan. And because holding on to bitter resentment doesn't help anyone survive. It just poisons the person holding it. But let me reiterate so there is no ambiguity. The help I am offering you is my administrative experience, my strategic thinking, and my time. Not my savings. Those are mine. Are we absolutely clear on this?
Yeah, Dad, we are clear. Thank you.
Good. Sunday at noon. I'll bring some sandwiches for lunch. Get your paperwork organized before I get there. Sunday was a quiet, overcast day. I drove back to Devonure Road, pulling into the familiar driveway right at 12 o'clock. Nathan opened the front door before I even had the chance to knock. He had clearly been watching out the window for me pacing the living room. I noted his anxiety without offering any comment. We walked into the kitchen. Lisa was standing by the stove. She turned around when I walked in, and the expression on her face was deeply complex. It was the particular, agonizing expression of someone who had spent the last 24 hours practicing an apology in the mirror and was now standing in the moment frantically deciding whether to give the polished, rehearsed version or the painful real one. I simply stood there and waited. I did not give her an easy out. She chose the real one. She looked me directly in the eye, and her voice was both careful and entirely unguarded. She told me that what she had said to me at that very table in February was wrong. She emphasized that it wasn't just strategically wrong or impolite, it was morally wrong. She admitted that I had done absolutely nothing but help their family for a year, and in return, she had spoken to me like I was nothing more than a financial line item to be exploited. She said she was deeply, truly sorry. I looked at her for a long moment, letting the weight of her confession settle in the room. I did not make her grovel, but I did not brush it off with a casual, "It's okay," either. Because it wasn't okay, but it was in the past. I told her that I appreciated her honesty. I told her I accepted the apology, and I promised her that I had not walked through their front door carrying any hidden resentment. I explained that I was there simply because Nathan is my son, and because little Cooper had left a crayon drawing of a spaceship outside my bedroom door on the very day I moved out. And I have kept that drawing proudly displayed on my refrigerator ever since. When I said that I physically saw something in Lisa's tense shoulders finally release, the hostility was gone. The power struggle was over. We were just family again, dealing with a very real problem. We all sat down at the kitchen table. It was the exact same oak table where she had delivered her brutal ultimatum just weeks prior, with her hands folded and her aggressive proposal meticulously prepared. But the dynamic had entirely shifted. I was no longer the dependent house guest. I was the retired school principal running a crisis intervention. I spent the next 2 straight hours helping them see their financial situation with absolute unflinching clarity. I did not rescue them. I did not write a single check. I simply did what I had done for decades. I helped 2 overwhelmed people in a highly difficult position identify the correct logical sequence of steps. We mapped out the exact professional conversation Nathan needed to have with his regional director on Monday morning to salvage his reputation. We went through their household budget line by line, brutally identifying the discretionary items that were worth cutting first. The subscription services, the expensive gym memberships, the premium cable packages, the dining out. We established a realistic timeline for stabilizing the branch's overall numbers. Most importantly, we developed a series of short-term financial options that strictly did not involve asking their elderly father to liquidate his life savings. Through it all, I did not write a check. I did not even offer to write a check. And to their immense credit, neither Nathan nor Lisa asked me for one, because we had been abundantly clear about that boundary on Saturday morning, and Nathan had apparently relayed that clarity to his wife. By the end of the afternoon, the panic had left the room. They were still in a tough spot, but they had a blueprint. They had a way forward. Nathan walked me out to my car as the afternoon light began to fade. He stood in the driveway looking much lighter than he had when I arrived. He put his hand out for a handshake. It was a very Nathan thing to do, formal in the particular slightly awkward way of men who feel things very deeply, but don't quite know what else to do with their hands to show it. I reached out and shook his hand, but I held on to it for a second longer than a standard professional handshake requires. I gripped his hand firmly, looking him in the eye.
Thank you, Dad. I mean it. For everything today.
Take care of your family, Nathan. You have a plan now. Work the plan. Don't let the panic make your decisions for you.
I will. I promise.
And call me when Cooper's baseball season finally starts up next month. I have several strong opinions about his batting swing that he has been completely ignoring for 2 straight years, and I intend to correct them. For the first time in what felt like a very long time, Nathan laughed. And it wasn't a nervous chuckle. It was the real kind. The kind that comes from the chest. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove back toward Crescent Avenue, leaving my son to rebuild his own house while I went home to mine. If you've been listening to this story for a while and you want narratives like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I am told by the people who understand these internet metrics far better than I do that 97% of people who listen never actually take the 2 seconds to do so. But it is what keeps this whole operation running and allows these stories to find the people who genuinely need to hear them. So if you have found some value in my experience, thank you for your support. Now I want to step back from the narrative for a moment and say something directly to everyone listening. I want to speak to you not just as Josh Cook the father or Josh Cook the widower, but as Josh Cook, the retired principal, a man who has spent nearly 4 decades analyzing systems rules and human behavior. There are specific, structural things embedded in this story that matter far beyond what happened to me in that kitchen on Devonure Road. There are practical lessons here that I want you to carry with you. The first is something most people simply do not know until they find themselves in the middle of a crisis. When an elderly parent moves into an adult child's home, the legal landscape changes, whether you realize it or not. Even without a formal lease, even without paying a single dime in rent, and even without any written agreement whatsoever, that parent acquires legal residential rights. In the state of South Carolina, and in many other states with similar statutes, a person living in a home by the explicit permission of the property owner is legally classified as a licensee. You are not a trespasser, and you are not a temporary hotel guest. You are a resident. Because of this, removing you from that property requires proper formal written notice to vacate. Typically, a homeowner must provide a legally binding 30-day notice before any official eviction action can even be initiated through the court system. When Lisa sat across from me and delivered her ultimatum, hand over $120,000 or get out of the house immediately, her demand was not only morally reprehensible, it was completely legally uninformed. She had no power to enforce it. I knew this. I am a man who reads contracts for a living. I had quietly driven to Pleasantburg Drive and spoken to my attorney within 48 hours of that Tuesday conversation. I sat in an office that smelled of old paper and leather, and I confirmed exactly what my rights were. But here is the critical part. I chose not to weaponize that legal knowledge. I could have thrown the statute in her face. I could have dug my heels in, demanded my 30 days, and turned that house into an absolute war zone. But I didn't. I used the quiet confidence that knowledge gave me to remain perfectly calm, and I used the time it afforded me to find a house of my own instead. Legal rights protect you from being thrown on the street, but they do not protect you from living in a toxic environment. Never confuse the right to stay somewhere with a good reason to stay there. The second thing is perhaps the most important piece of advice I can offer to any older parent considering moving in with their children. There is a legal document called a life care agreement, sometimes referred to as a personal care agreement. It is a formal, legally binding contract that explicitly specifies the financial and living arrangements between an elderly parent and an adult child. A life care agreement outlines everything. It dictates the exact amount of rent, if any. It covers the division of utilities and household contributions. It specifies the parent's rights to privacy within the home, the expectations regarding childcare or chores, and most importantly, the specific agreed-upon conditions for ending the living arrangement. It takes the emotional ambiguity out of the situation and replaces it with professional clarity. It protects both parties equally. The sheer absence of a life care agreement in my situation meant that Lisa's sudden demand for $120,000 had absolutely no legal foundation whatsoever. She couldn't enforce it because we had never agreed to it. My savings were mine. They were sitting securely in my own account at my own bank. There was no lien against them, no joint claim, and no legal mechanism by which she could suddenly compel a massive financial contribution. She was asking, or rather, demanding. But because of the way I had protected myself, I was not legally obligated to answer. If you are an older parent, and you are considering consolidating your life and moving into an adult child's spare room, have the conversation about a life care agreement first. Do it before you pack a single box. You do this not because you do not trust your children, but because absolute clarity at the very beginning of a transition prevents exactly this kind of Tuesday afternoon ambush in the kitchen. Clarity is kindness. Ambiguity is the breeding ground for resentment. The third thing is much simpler, but it is a truth that many aging parents forget in a moment of vulnerability. Keep your money in your own name. Keep it in your own distinct account, with no joint access given to anyone who has not earned that profound level of financial trust over a very long period of time. Retirement savings are not a communal household resource to be tapped into whenever the younger generation mismanages their budget. Your savings are a life's work. They represent decades of waking up early, packing a lunch, making quiet sacrifices, and showing up to a job day after day. They belong exclusively to the person who built them. You owe your children your love, your wisdom, and your moral support. You do not owe them your financial security. It has now been exactly 6 weeks since moving day. Life on Crescent Avenue has taken on a beautiful, quiet rhythm. June Whitfield came over last Thursday afternoon carrying a second pound cake. She proudly announced that it was a slightly different recipe than the first one. She specified this right away, unprompted, because June is a woman who deeply believes in the scientific process of iteration. We sat together in the rocking chairs on my wide front porch, drinking iced tea and watching the neighborhood go by. We spent an hour talking about the Greenville County Library's massive new renovation project over on Heritage Green Place. June had reviewed the architectural plans that had been published in the local paper, and she was highly concerned about whether the new outdoor reading garden in the central courtyard was going to be planted correctly. She had very strong opinions about the soil drainage and the placement of the benches. I listened to her passionately describe the ideal layout, and I smiled. I told June that Pat would have had the exact same intense opinions about the garden's landscaping. I told her that Pat believed a library garden shouldn't just be decorative. It needed to be functional, quiet, and heavily shaded. June received that comment with the particular quiet dignity of someone who has just been told something incredibly true and knows it in her bones. Cooper came over to visit with Nathan last Saturday morning. He walked through my front door, marched straight to the kitchen table, and spent 45 uninterrupted minutes showing me the massive new Lego set he had carefully transported in his backpack. He explained the structural logic of his design choices, why he used specific reinforced bricks for the foundation, why the roof had a certain slope with the absolute deadpan seriousness of a small, seasoned engineer. I listened to him intently, treating his presentation with the exact same professional respect I used to give my high school science teachers. When he finished, I took him out to the backyard. I showed him the concrete footings I had poured for a back fence repair I had completed earlier that morning. I explained the chemistry of how concrete cures and why the depth of the hole prevents the fence from leaning in the winter. He crouched down, examined my work, and found it genuinely, intellectually interesting. That small moment of shared curiosity confirmed my overall assessment of his character. He is a good boy. The spaceship drawing he left outside my bedroom door on Devonshire Road is still secured to my refrigerator with a magnet. It sits right next to June's first introductory note about azalea placement. And speaking of notes, there is the matter of my small leather journal. The entry from February 6th, the Tuesday Lisa delivered her ultimatum, consists of exactly 2 words. I mentioned them at the very beginning of this story, and I owe you the answer. The entry says, bought house. I wrote those 2 words that Tuesday night sitting on the edge of the bed in the spare room, long before I ever picked up the phone to call Ray or Beverly Cross the next morning. I wrote it because I already knew exactly what I was going to do. 36 years of running a busy school building means that when someone sits across a desk or a kitchen table from you, delivers a heavily prepared speech, and then waits smugly for your emotional response, you already know in the first 30 seconds whether their speech worked. Lisa's speech hadn't worked. It had failed spectacularly. I didn't need to agonize over my options. I already knew what came next. I was leaving. On Sunday evenings now, as the sun starts to dip below the tree line, I walk down Crescent Avenue. I walk the neighborhood exactly the way Pat and I used to. I stroll slowly past the grand old houses with their deep, welcoming porches and mature oak trees. I walk through the North Main neighborhood that my wife loved so dearly, for reasons she always described to me as completely self-evident to anyone with eyes. The massive dogwood tree in my own backyard is in full, breathtaking bloom right now. It was completely bare when I first walked the property and bought the house. Seeing those bright, white petals emerge feels profound. In the particular, wonderfully irrational way that beautiful things feel sometimes, it feels like something that was deliberately arranged just for me, like a quiet blessing from someone who isn't here anymore, but who still wants me to have a nice view. When I walk past June's house, she waves at me from her porch swing. I raise my hand and wave back. The air is warm, the neighborhood is quiet, and my heart is incredibly steady. I know exactly what the journal entry for this Sunday evening is going to say. I will sit at my own table, open the leather cover, pick up my pen, and write, "Good evening." Because at 68 years old, living on a quiet tree-lined street that Pat deeply loved, sitting in a beautiful craftsman house that is legally, financially, and spiritually mine, it genuinely is a good evening. If you like this story, please join our growing community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Your presence here matters. And as always, thank you for listening, and thank you for being a part of this.